All right, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. If you can have a seat. Jazakumullah khairan. So just a heads up, I am recording this. It's not live, and I will only record my part. Right? So once the Q&A comes about, I will turn the stream off so that you all can ask whatever you want, and you're comfortable in that way. But a lot of people have asked me, they want to be part of, they want to see what's going on, right? They want to hear what's going on, they want to learn. And so in order for the benefit to be more general, then I'm just recording this, okay? So keep questions till the end. We do already have a series of questions that were submitted prior to the class. And of course, we'll entertain any questions that arise during the class. And the topic today is Islam homophobic? And you add all the other letters, biphobic, transphobic, etc. Just to keep the title short, homophobic. So this is a question that is very important because the community, the LGBT community, and the lobbies behind it are pretty much accusing anybody who does not agree with their ideology, with their lifestyle. They're labeling them as a bigot. And among them are us Muslims. Because in Islam, and I think we all know by now, as we discussed last year, but I'll go ahead and refresh our minds. We know in Islam, the practice of a man and a man or a woman and a woman engaging in intimacy at any level is haram. And that Islam does not allow the same gender to be married. Right? In fact, any expression of sexuality outside the bounds of marriage between a man and a woman is strictly and unequivocally haram. And for people who come and start saying, there's nothing in the Quran that says homosexuality is haram, just go look at the story of Lut alayhi salam, which is mentioned in multiple places in the Quran. Lut explicitly says, أَتَأْتُونَ الذُّكْرَانَ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ وَتَذَرُونَ مَا خَلَقَ لَكُمْ رَبُّكُمْ مِنْ أَزْوَاجِكُمْ. Lut alayhi salam says, are you engaging other men? He's talking to men. Are you engaging other men in intimacy or sexuality while leaving women? Right? It's clear cut. And so anyone who comes, whether Muslim or non, and says that no, there's nothing clear in Islam, that's a very dishonest thing to say. Very dishonest. And so I hope by now our community understands where Islam stands in this regard. And this is by consensus of all Muslim experts. By consensus throughout Islamic history. So the topic today isn't so much what is Islam's position on homosexuality, but is Islam homophobic? In other words, does our belief as Muslims that the practice of homosexuality, whether it's male with male or female with female or transgenderism or being bisexual, is our stance that this is haram? Does that make us phobic or enemies or aggressive towards this community? That's the question today. So to do this, let's go ahead and look at the definition of a bigot. So if you just Google bigot and you look up the definition, this is the definition of a bigot. A person who is unreasonably attached to a belief, opinion, or faction, especially one who is prejudiced against or antagonistic towards a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular group. That's the definition of bigot. And there are three primary elements of a bigot. Number one, they have an unreasonable attachment to a belief or opinion. So when we are accused of being bigots towards the LGBT community, they are claiming that we have an unreasonable belief. Our belief that this practice is immoral and unhealthy and unethical is unreasonable. That's one. And that this belief of ours causes us to be antagonistic, hateful, aggressive. And that's number two. And that aggression is directed towards a person or a people based on their membership to that community. So we are being accused as Muslims of being aggressive towards a homosexual or a transgender by merit of them being part of this community. That's the definition of a bigot in terms of this context. So we're going to look at each one of these conditions. So the first is Islam's belief that the LGBT lifestyle is unethical and haram? Is that an unreasonable belief? Now, to answer this question, we need to take a step back and look at sexuality in Islam as a whole. Because one of the reasons why this whole rise of LGBT happened, and we'll discuss this in another week, is because, or one of the reasons, not the entire reason, but one of the reasons is Christianity's very negative look towards sexuality. That, especially the Catholic Church, that this is something evil, this is something bad, and you're only allowed to do it by necessity, or else, the human population will just go extinct. This is how it's presented. It's evil, this is disgusting. Right? And now we've gone to another extreme. As a reaction to that extreme, there's another extreme. Everything, just be sexual about it. Everything is sexualized. Everything. I mean, you can take any object and somehow make a sexual joke out of it. It's bizarre, it's weird. So it's another extreme. So where's Islam's position about sexuality? Islam's position is that sexuality is very important to the human experience. Not just because it is necessary for reproduction. Our species cannot exist without sexuality. It cannot. It's not just for that. And I haven't done extensive research in this regard, but there's something about sexual expression that is important to your being as a human. You being a human being, sexuality is very important to that experience. And because of how important it is, Islam has placed very clear and very strict guidelines about sexuality. In other words, if you think about your brain, your brain is an essential part of your well being. You cannot function without a brain. Now, doesn't it make sense that as a result of this piece of information, you are going to do whatever you can to protect the brain? Can we say that this is reasonable? Right? Same thing with the heart. Look at your physiology. You have ribs. Your anatomy, you have ribs. Why are these ribs here? Because a lot of fundamental organs that are necessary for your health and well-being are in this place. So it's as though the ribs are there to protect your health. Is it unreasonable for us to have ribs? I would say it's quite logical. So if sexuality is an integral part of the human experience, both as a species for us to reproduce, but also in terms of our mental health, in terms of our biological health, in terms of our emotional health, right, then it makes perfect sense that Islam is going to place guidelines that are clear and quite strict in order to preserve that. Because as soon as that is unhealthy, the human being begins to weaken. The human being becomes unhealthy. And that's why Iblis, the first thing he did to Adam and our mother Hawa, was to try to get them to take their clothes off. The first thing, because he understands that as a being of desires, sexuality is one of our top desires. If you can corrupt that in a person or in a society, you corrupt the entire person, the entire society. So Islam has placed very clear guidelines in that regard. So that's one point. That's why we have these. That's why dating is not allowed, because it's not healthy for the human being. It's not a healthy way of expressing one's sexuality. That's why it can only be done in marriage. That's why between only a man and a woman. Also, Islam encourages marriage by making it prophetic. So, unlike the Catholic Church or some parts of Christianity that vilifies or demonizes or makes it ugly, this practice of sexuality, Islam has made the institute of marriage. And at the center of marriage is intimacy. Right? Or else, what's unique about a husband and a wife? It's so unique that this is the only person I can do this with. Right? And Allah and His Messenger have made this prophetic. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that marriage is the way of prophets. And the Prophet ﷺ says, whoever intentionally avoids marriage, I'm not saying they avoid marriage because there are certain circumstances. I'm not saying they're trying to find a good spouse and it's become difficult like at our times today. I'm saying someone who does not get married thinking that that's a healthier lifestyle or that's more prophetic or more in line with the prophetic way of life, then the Prophet says that person is not following my way. So marriage is made prophetic, and that means it's beautiful. Also, the Prophet ﷺ says that when a man engages his wife in intimacy, or a woman engages her husband in intimacy, there's reward, there's ajr in that. You get rewarded for doing that. And the companions were kind of shocked, like, Ya Rasulullah, man, we approach our desires and we get reward for that? And the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, wouldn't you get sin if you approach that desire in a haram way? They said, yes. So Allah encourages the good way, the halal way, by making it rewarded, right? Um, Also, because of its importance, Islam highly regulates the practice, as I mentioned. So let's look at some of the logic behind the confinements. Right? Why is it that it can only can only be between man and woman? Why is it that it can only be within marriage? You can't just go and date and randomly go to some person and say, hey, let's go ahead and have a relationship. No, there are confinements. Well, as Muslims, we believe Allah created man and woman, and He created them with distinct characteristics. Yes, there are overlap. There's overlap between the creation of a man, a male, and a female. There's overlap. But we all know that there are clear differences in their physiology, in their anatomy, in their biology, in their psychology, in their emotional expressions. There are clear differences. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises Himself for His creation. فَتَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ. فَتَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ أَحْسَنُ الْخَالِقِينَ. Allah praises Himself and saying that the barakah, the blessings, is in the way He has created things. Meaning, the best version of you, whether you are a male or a female, is to preserve the way Allah created you. Because who's a better creator than Allah? And if we play around with that, then we can only demote the human being. So when a man starts behaving like a woman, they are not empowering themselves. They are demoting themselves. And when a woman behaves like a man, they're not empowering themselves. They are demoting themselves. Why? Because Allah created the man with certain hormones, with the woman with certain hormones. We go against that, we demote ourselves. We embrace that, we empower ourselves. So the hormones that Allah has given men is so that they can reach their best of potential. And when the woman embraces her hormones, doesn't see her emotional side as being a negative, doesn't see her physiology, her biology as being a hindrance in her place in the work field, when she embraces the way Allah created her, then she empowers herself that way. So we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created man and woman. But we also believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, among His major blessings is that He created for the man a female and for the female a male. In other words, a man in of himself is not complete, and a woman in of herself is not complete. She needs what the man has, and the man needs what she has. This is a reality. And a man cannot live a full life without the female. And a female cannot live her full life without the man. Now, of course, we're talking about a healthy relationship. Yes, there are toxic relationships, there are evil men, there are evil women. Put that aside for now. We're just looking at the philosophy of Islam when it comes to why there are confinements. What's the logic behind it? And the Prophet ﷺ says, "An-nisa shaqa'iqur rijal." Women are the other half of men, meaning women complete men. Without a woman, you're not complete men, period. And vice versa. Men complete women. Without a man, you are not complete. Right? So that's number one. If Allah created us this certain way, our biologies, our physiologies, our emotions are telling us you need a partner. You need an opposite. Hence, as soon as the man or the woman reaches the age of puberty, what do they develop? They develop desire for the opposite gender. Allah created us that way, and He's the best of creators. The question is, why does He create us that way? So that we pursue what is necessary for us, what is important for us. Yes, a man can live an entire life without being married, and a woman can live an entire life without being married. We're not talking about the possibilities, we're talking about the logic. Further, one of the reasons why there are confinements around the expression of sexuality and why it's limited to male and female within the context of marriage is that part of our well being as an individual and as human beings is family. Family is essential. A person cannot survive without a family. You know, Western researchers, they looked at the Arab world pre Islam. It's a very desolate land, a very hostile land, a very a very poor land in resources. Water is random. And they're looking at the Arabs and wondering, how did they live? How did they survive in that land? And so they came to the conclusion that it was because there are dates. Dates as a fruit are very nutritious, and so they had access to dates, they ate, and they were fine. That's not the right reason. The reason why Arab society in the desert survived is because of family. Tribes, they survived because there was a code. We take care of each other. And so they were able to persevere in the most hostile conditions. Why? Because of family. And yes, sometimes there is an extreme in terms of family. And we're kind of, the previous generations were like that. Whatever the mother, the father says, you cannot question. That's not Islamic. In fact, all the prophets who were sent to disbelieving societies, they try to loosen that very strict family tie. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes and says, if your father and your mother and your brother and your wife and whatever are more beloved to you than Allah, that's a problem. So there are limitations in terms of the family tie, but it's necessary. We here in the West are in another extreme. They went completely on the opposite side of that extreme family structure, the hyper-structured family, and went to family means nothing. Family is the last in my priority list. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us family is essential to your well-being. And for that reason, every time Allah, or most of the time when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about His rights, wa'budullah, worship Allah, don't worship other than Him, He follows it up by saying, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, be good to your parents. وَبِذِي الْقُرْبَى, and be excellent towards your relatives. The family unit is an essential part of our well-being. Look at the research. Look at the statistics around children who grow up in a single-parent home. Way more likely to drop out of school. Way more likely to develop social deviances. Way more likely to fall into gangs. Way more likely to become an addict of drugs. Why? Because the father is missing. And so the family unit is essential. And as a family unit, a child's well-being depends on the presence of a father and a mother. There are things a father can provide the child, and there are things a mother can provide a child that the other cannot, period. And so how is a child going to grow up with proper health and well-being when it's two daddies, when it's two mommies? You need the other side. Look at the statistics. Don't take it from me. Right? There's things that a father can give their children, a mother cannot. And there are things a mother can give the child, a father cannot. And that's just the reality around it. So family is essential, and therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it between man and woman and in marriage, because marriage restricts the person. You can't just up and bounce. One of the reasons feminism was fueled is because these men who kept just, I don't like this stuff, and they just up and bounce, leave, I'm out. In Islam, you can't do that. Your child is your child until you die, period. You cannot get around that. You cannot change that. It is permanent. Right? So that's another reason to preserve the family. And another reason is unrestricted sexuality is extremely harmful to humans at the biological health level and at the mental health level. Promiscuity, having multiple partners, it's not healthy for the person. You know, there's a study that tracks MRI, they did MRIs on, take the chairs, guys, to the other side, that scans the brains of cocaine addicts. So they show you a healthy brain, the brain of a cocaine addict, and a brain of a porn addict. Do you know the brain of a porn addict looks almost exactly the same as that of a cocaine addict? And the same holds true in promiscuity. It's not just looking. Pornography doesn't have this magical power that, aside from it, it doesn't do the same thing. No, promiscuity leads to the same thing. It's unhealthy to the mind. So this idea of unrestricted, unbounded sexuality, where I just go and hook up with someone, we go to spring break in Miami Beach and we just chill and relax, and we're just expressing and getting our hormones are raging, and we get that stuff out. It is detrimental to mental health. So both men and women, I'm quoting here, for both men and women, sex, with a casual stranger bodes poorly for mental health and self-esteem. Another quote, research shows those who were not depressed before had more depressive symptoms and loneliness after engaging in casual sex. Plenty of emotional consequences to this lifestyle. And I quote again, for one, there's a discomfort factor. Despite the flood of media messages that hookups are okay, if not desirable, people may still feel that they've done something wrong that violates their own individual standards. Feeling perhaps pressure to get involved because everybody else is, they may develop performance anxiety, ironically setting the stage for future sexual dysfunction. Pay attention to this. Those who are hypersexual, men who are hypersexual, lose the ability to perform at a very young age. They develop dysfunctions. This is serious stuff, right? And I've heard people tell me, I'm just, I cannot, questions till the end, right? I cannot perform. I have lost that ability. Why? Because of their addiction to this. The same thing holds true when someone actually engages it, not just simply watches it. If watching it is that bad, how about engaging it? It's very problematic. Um, Other common reactions include regret, disappointment, confusion, embarrassment, guilt, and low self-esteem. Although other individuals certainly report feeling proud, nervous, excited, and desirable or wanted, feelings tended to be more positive before and during the hookup, but more negative afterwards. This is the reality. It's unhealthy. So Islam comes and says, you can do it as much as you want, but within the confines of marriage. And when it's done that way, it's done healthily. It's a healthy expression, a healthy way of engaging that pure desire. And of course, sexually transmitted diseases. Let me just think about it, guys and ladies. Would you ever put your hand with an open wound in it? Imagine someone who has an open wound. Literally, the blood is still coming out. And they put their hand in a pile of poop. What? I heard some. What do you think of that? Would you encourage someone to do that? Would you? Huh? Would you? Never, right? What's the difference when a guy does that with another guy? Well, where's he putting it? Where is he putting it? He's putting it in a pile of poop. And it's open. Please excuse the graphic nature, but we have to be honest about this. It's not beautiful, it's disgusting. It's unhealthy. And what do you think is going to happen when all that bacteria is piled up in one place? And now there's an open place that this can enter the urinal tract of the guy. What do you think is going to happen? Aside from the fact that even from a ratio perspective, the ratios are off. It is an extremely painful thing that they go ahead and do that. And you find those who perform this type of sexuality, sooner or later, they lose the ability of holding their feces. It just becomes loose. It just starts falling out. And it requires surgery. Promiscuity. Do you know how sexually transmitted diseases arise? Well, when a woman has fluid from multiple men in the reproductive area, that's where sexual transmitted diseases come from. So what you see, our biology, our mental health, our emotional well-being is all telling us this type of lifestyle is not healthy. It's not right. Right? So this is the logic behind why Islam has placed these restrictions when it comes to the expression of sexuality. It is to preserve it in its purest form. It is not to limit it. Once you are married, once you have that context where where it is healthy to engage, do it as much as you want. And every time you do it with your spouse, you get hasanat, you get rewarded for it. Nothing wrong with it. But beyond that, it becomes unhealthy. Now, we're not perfect human beings. Some people make mistakes, there's ups and downs. One mistake isn't going to ruin you. But understand the logic. Is Islam unreasonable in our convictions that sexuality can only healthily be expressed between a male and a female in the bounds of marriage? This is our logic behind it. And I hope you all see that it's quite reasonable. It's not unreasonable. Remember, the first condition of a bigot is that they have an unreasonable belief. Our beliefs are unreasonable. Data supports what we do. Statistics support what we do. Research supports our lifestyle. And just basic human functionality is showing us that there's a healthy way and the other ways are very unhealthy. Now, on the issue of transgenders, right, the analogy that people give is the following. There is a mental health condition where some people believe that their arm or a certain limb of theirs is not supposed to be there. They'll literally look at their arm and say, this isn't supposed to be here. I need to cut it off. They call that a mental health disorder. What's the difference between that and someone who looks at their body and says, my genital is not supposed to be there, it's wrong? Right? What's the difference? What we call now transgender has always been labeled a type of mental health problem. It's called gender dysphoria, where someone believes that they are in the wrong gender. I see that I'm a male, but I'm actually a girl. They call that gender dysphoria. It is a mental health problem. If I were to sit here and turn and start talking and having a conversation, and you all are looking, who are you talking to? And I say, I'm talking to Bob. You don't see Bob? I say, no, we don't see Bob. No, Bob is right there. You all are crazy. Who's the crazy one? Me. Now, I don't mean to say go and call these people crazy. But all I'm saying is understand the reality on the ground. The reason why homosexuality was considered a mental health disorder for the longest time, transgenderism was considered a mental health disorder, only to be taken off of the most recent DSM, which is the mental health catalog, if you want to call it that. But why were they taken off? Not because of research, not because of scientific inquiry, but because of political and social pressure. That's why. So scientists have always considered these conditions to be mental health problems. But because of lobbying and social movements, they've been taken off, not because of scientific research. So always remember that. So I hope here you see that our belief in terms of sexuality is not unreasonable, it's quite reasonable. The second condition is that makes us antagonistic towards the LGBT community. So it begs the question, do we hate homosexuality? Does Islam hate things? What do you think the answer is? No. The answer is yes. Put aside homosexuals right now. Put aside an individual who identifies as one of these letters. Are there certain behaviors or certain people Allah despises? Do you despise Hitler? You don't despise him? Well, we can talk about that later. I despise someone who kills millions upon millions of people. Right? Do you despise Jeffrey Dahmer? You guys know who that guy is? Yeah? Do you despise him? Yes? Kind of? Well, you all are weird. Anyway, the idea is what? We hate certain people, don't we? What do you think about someone saying, why? I want to embrace Jeffrey Dahmer. He's a human. He's just expressing himself. He just felt that way. He had feelings. Well, didn't he have feelings to do these things? Wasn't it a desire for him? Yet we are perfectly comfortable saying Jeffrey Dahmer and all of his likes, every single rapist, should not be embraced. Where should they be? They should be in jail. They should be punished for what they did. So are there people Allah and His Messenger despise? The answer is yes. But what does that mean in terms of our actions? Well, number one, if you love something, then by default you will despise the things that go against that. If you love your mother or your father, you will hate anybody who mocks them, won't you? That's part of love. If you love something, then by default you will despise something that goes against it. Hence, can't we agree that the LGBT community hate certain people? That they despise them? That they are antagonistic towards them? Well, who are those people that they hate? Anybody who goes against what they love, right? That's natural human functioning. So this notion that love is love and love everything and love everybody, it's unhuman. It's illogical. It doesn't make sense. A person who's able to love everything can do that because they truly love nothing. It's nothing. If I don't love something, then I don't hate anything. But if I love something, then I'll by default hate the things that go against that thing. So as we're saying, there are certain people we hate. There are certain actions that we hate, and those who practice those actions, we hate those people. A mass murderer. Don't you hate Trump? I know some people say no, we don't, right? But I'm just giving examples here. I don't care to promote that. I don't care to demote it either. The idea is we all have people we simply despise. And we don't despise them because their name is X, Y, and Z. We don't despise them because, we despise them for their actions. And that is part of human being. And justice cannot be reached until we despise certain things. That's the fact of the matter. You lose hate, you lose justice. But again, how do we express that displeasure, this despising of the action and those who engage in it? Islam regulates this concept of hate. It's regulated. When you look at Quran and Sunnah, it's not open hate and just go ahead and express your hate the way you want to and take a hammer and bash people. Islam regulates it. What are some of those regulations? Well, number one, religious hate does not allow harm to be done. In other words, just because you dislike someone doesn't justify you going and transgressing against that person. Islam embodies that. But when we're accused of being bigots, or you are antagonistic towards us, meaning you're going to attack us. No, that's not the case. How long has homosexuality been around in the West? How long? You think back in the 80s there weren't any homosexuals? Huh? Right? Despite that, it was known. People knew these things happen. Back, did you used to hear, I guess you guys weren't even born, right? But you won't hear khutbahs and people and talking. And why? And we'll get to the reason a little bit later. Right? So just because we despise something, and by the way, Lut alayhi salam made it clear to his people, Inni li'amalikum min al-qalin. I despise what you do. And this is a messenger of Allah alayhi salam. Just because we despise something it doesn't sanction harming them. And look at Muslims. I'm sorry, do you see Muslims going around bashing homosexuals? You don't see this, right? So look at the practice of Muslims. We're not going and preaching hate and going and attack them. We're not doing that. But the action needs to be addressed. And again, how we address it, I'll get to a little bit later. Religious hate doesn't mean absolute hate. Rather, it's connected to the sin only. You might love the same person for something positive about them. So if you can imagine someone who identifies as gay, we don't agree with that. We dislike it and we passionately dislike that. But that same person is going about opening, for example, food banks. Do we love that about that person? The answer is yes. Can we even support that person's efforts to open food banks? We can discuss that, right? So Islam, when we say we hate a certain action or we hate a person for a certain action, it does not equate necessarily to absolute hate. We can hate them in one way, but appreciate them in another way. Also, religious hate means that this kind of hate should come out of love and goodwill, and that we should constantly wish and make dua for their guidance, just like the Prophet ﷺ made dua for his enemies. So just because I despise someone for their evil or for their behaviors does not mean I still don't have a role to play in trying to bring good for them. The prophets were like this. The prophets spoke out against the misbehaviors and the social injustices of their people. Right? But at the same time, they made dua for them. At the same time, they wished good for them. At the same time, they were patient with them until they learned, until they chose the right thing. When the people of Ta'if threw pebbles and stones at the Prophet ﷺ and attempted to humiliate him and exile him from their land because he came seeking refuge, what did he do? Did he say, may Allah's curse be upon them? Did he say, I'm going to kill you and execute you one day? He said, perhaps from their children will come a generation that believes in Allah. So yes, we Muslims, there are things we hate. It's very normal. It's part of love and it's part of justice. But our hate is regulated by these ideas. Also, we love and hate something based on what Allah loves and hate, not based on our egos. It's not personal. We don't dislike this just because it goes against me. The only reason we're having this conversation because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had the conversation. If someone was going about, someone has 15 cats in their home, you might think it's weird, but we're not going to make this an issue of love and hate. Why? Because Allah didn't make it an issue of love and hate. So it's not an issue of ego, it's an issue of divine guidance. And so we love and hate based on what Allah loves and hates. And being critical to those actions and those people doesn't come at the expense of respect and gentleness. We can passionately disagree with them, but we can do it in a way that's gentle and in a way that is respectful. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا. Speak well to people, all people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We gave dignity to the child of Adam, no matter who they are. If it is a human being, then they have dignity by divine ordinance. And no matter how far we believe they've gone astray, no matter how much we think they are behaving in immoral and unethical behaviors, we still give them that dignity by merit of them being a human being. So yes, we despise the action, but we do it in a way that is respectful and in a way that is gentle. One might ask, well, if Allah is loving, why don't we teach absolute love? They come and say Allah is the loving God. He's the all-loving. That's actually a very Christian thing. Islam doesn't go about and say Allah loves everybody and everything. No matter what you do, Allah loves. No, Allah says He loves certain things, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He despises certain things. He says His anger is upon certain people for certain behaviors. Right? So that's not exactly true. But the point is, absolute love erodes justice. Absolute love erodes justice. And the universe was created on the principle of justice. There needs to be checks and balances. Someone does something wrong. No matter how much you love that person, justice must be implemented. And the Prophet ﷺ shows this. And he shows it to the extent where he says, if my daughter, Fatima, radiallahu ta'ala anha, steals, I would bring justice to her. His own daughter. Of course, she would never do that. But the idea is, no matter how much you love the person, justice is justice. And you cannot let your love of somebody cause you to neglect that justice. And the Prophet ﷺ tells us that there were previous generations who would be just and apply justice to the poor people, but they would ignore the wealthy people. And he said those societies perished because of that lack of justice. So we can't let our love come in the way of justice, even if it's our parents, even if it's our siblings, even if it's our own self. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كُونُوا قَوَّامِينَ بِالْقِسْطِ شُهَدَاءَ لِلَّهِ وَلَوْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَوِ الْوَالِدَيْنِ وَالْأَقْرَبِينَ. Be just for Allah, even if it's against yourself, against your parents, or against your relatives. So love, absolute love, erodes justice. Also, hate is discomforting. We don't like that feeling. It's not a good feeling. But there's a wisdom in it, that discomfort protects us from falling into the sin. If we as Muslims, I just sit here and say, no, it's okay, love them, embrace them, then we're going to accept it. And if we accept it, then we can fall into it. And if it's harmful and we fall into it, who are we benefiting? Honestly, who are we benefiting? Nobody. We're just harming people if we are absolutely loving. Now, examples of this moderation of hate in Islam is the following. You have two disbelievers in the time of the Prophet ﷺ who were relatives of the Prophet. Abu Lahab, his uncle, and Abu Talib, who's his uncle as well. When you look at how the Prophet engaged both, you'll find a different model. Even the Quran, how the Quran addressed both is different. Abu Lahab was a vicious enemy of the Prophet. He hassled the Prophet, he heckled the Prophet, he mocked the Prophet, he attacked the Prophet. So he was animus and vicious towards the Prophet. He was aggressive towards the Prophet. Abu Talib, he didn't believe, but he was kind to the Prophet. He protected the Prophet. He was respectful to the Prophet. So when Allah addresses the first, Abu Lahab, What does he say? تَبَّتْ يَدَا أَبِي لَهَبٍ وَتَبْ. May Abu Lahab perish. But when he talked about Abu Talib, the kind man, Allah said to the Prophet, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ. You don't guide someone just because you love them. So the Prophet loved his uncle who was a disbeliever. But the Quran was very aggressive towards Abu Lahab because he was aggressive. So when we talk about, this is a very important point. This is the crux of the matter right here. And I'll get to that in a second. You can see how the example, how we can hate somebody. No doubt we hate the disbelief of Abu Lahab. And we hate the disbelief of his uncle Abu Talib. But we can treat them differently based on what? How they engage us. This is a huge point. Right? So the second point when it comes to bigotry is animosity, antagonizing. Do we passionately disagree and despise the action of all these alphabet letters? The answer is yes. Does that mean we become antagonistic and we target them and we become unjust and aggressive and violent towards them? No. No, that's not the case. Hence, all the homosexuals who came before this modern movement, nobody was talking about them. Nobody was making khutbahs about them. The question is why? Again, I'll get to that in just a second. Now, the third point about bigotry is that a person is targeted for being a member of a community. So they're accusing us just because they are part of the LGBT community that we are attacking them. Now, the identity of LGBT, we're going to talk about that in a different week. But what I will say here is that they are creating a community based on something that is baseless. But again, we'll talk about that more in depth, the whole feeling fad and psychology and whatnot. We'll talk about that in another week. So we'll address that third point later. To conclude, I want to give you an analogy. Imagine a group of, I'm just going to say Arabs because I'm an Arab. A group of Arab men were strategically going to different elementary schools. So how old are kids in elementary schools? 6, 7, 8, right? Okay. They were strategically going to elementary schools in the morning to rob children of their lunch money because they were poor. So the ones who are robbing are poor. They're doing it because they're poor. Right? And every time they rob a child, they will tell a child, don't tell your parents, okay? Don't tell your parents. We're poor. That's why we're doing this. Now, with time, parents catch wind of what's going on. What do you think the parents are going to do? Right? Would you say, is it a reasonable reaction that the parents go and stop this? Yeah, would you all agree that's reasonable? Now, when the parents confront these young Arab men, the Arab men respond and say, you all are bigots because you're doing this because we're Arabs and because we're poor. You all see the analogy? Why do the parents go after these people? Is it because they're Arab? Is it because they're poor? Or is it because they aggressed against a portion of the population? Right? I keep mentioning homosexuality, this stuff, drag queens, queers have been around for decades. You don't have the reaction that you have today. Why are Muslims and Christians and Jews and families and parents reacting the way they are today? Is it out of bigotry or because the LGBT community has transgressed against broader society? What's the reason? You all tell me. When this community is now making books that's encouraging 5-year-olds to engage in oral sex, to play with each other, is that not an aggression? I've seen it with my own 2 eyes. Is that an aggression? Tell me, gentlemen and ladies. Is that an aggression? Yes. So when Muslims talk out against this, speak out against this, is it because they're LGBT or because they have transgressed and aggressed and has crossed every red boundary? That's why we're doing it. Or else, if my neighbor is a homosexual who does something in the privacy of his home or her home, I can care less as a Muslim, nor am I obligated as a Muslim. I don't have a moral duty to enforce my morality, my worldview on another person. But if that person starts coming on my lawn and start behaving a certain way, I'm going to stop them not because of their identity, but because you're on my lawn. That's a transgression, right? So we need to be careful in this regard. And Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah ta'ala, says the legal basis for fighting them, he's talking about the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when they fought against the mushrikeen, the polytheists, the Arab polytheists. The legal basis for fighting them was not because of their disbelief, but because of their aggression. As Allah says, وَقَاتِلُوا الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ. Fight the people who have fought you. Fight the people, push back against those who have aggressed against you, who have done you an injustice. When a person gets fired because they don't endorse this lifestyle, they think that this lifestyle is immoral. Is that not a transgression? When this country has the First Amendment that allows me the freedom to practice my religion the way I see fit, and then you have this lobby, this group of people that want to stop me from doing it, shove it down my throat. Is the issue that, oh, you're part of a community and we hate you for that, or because you are transgressing against my rights? This is the issue here. So the uprise of parents and whatnot is because of the aggression. And I'm sure you've seen the videos of people going to Target and showing infant clothing of infants, that's sexualizing these kids. It is disgusting, and it should be enraging. And now you have laws and legislation that makes it that doesn't allow parents to see the medical records of their 12-year-old without the permission of their child. Think about that. As a senior in high school, did you not have to get your parents' permission to go on a lousy field trip? They don't need to get permission from their parents to cut off their genitals. Is this not nonsense? I could care less about somebody, what they do in the privacy of their home, or how they identify. I care about the transgression. And if I don't stand up and say something, then justice is lost. This is the issue. Stop shoving this down our throats. Do what you want. We could care less. Honestly, we can care less. Right? So Ibn Taymiyyah says that our reaction, our despising is of their aggression, not necessarily of their beliefs or their lifestyles. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين. Allah doesn't restrict us from being kind and engaging and building friendships with people who we disagree with, but they don't aggress against us. Allah prohibits us from building those relationships with people who are openly animist towards us, who are aggressing against us. So Muslims will speak out against this because it's an aggression, not because it's an identity or not because of their identity. And we do this to meet, and we will do this in a way that is just, in the regulations that Islam provides us, because we have a sincere concern for the future as well as for their future, as well as the future of our society and the future of humanity. When I tell someone who's LGBT, this is immoral, it's unethical, I do it in concern for them, not in tyranny. What do I have to gain? In fact, I have a lot more to lose. It's more difficult and makes my life more stressful when I actually have to engage this. I can just say, oh yeah, go ahead, do whatever you want, man. It's all good. Isn't that easier? But I have a sincere concern because Allah has taught me this. You're not well. When someone looks in the mirror and sees the obvious features of a male, yet thinks they're a female, they're not well. It's when a man is attracted to another man, they're not well. I don't mean this in a way that's condescending or putting them down or saying, oh, you are evil people. But you're not well. If a lady is in a toxic marriage, a toxic relationship with an abusive man, isn't it not sincerity to go to that lady and say, you're not in a healthy relationship? Or should I say, oh, your feelings and you feel good about it, love is love, you're A-okay? It's not the way it works, right? So We should be concerned, sincerely concerned, for the well being of those suffering with this. Inshallah, we'll talk about how we engage people from that compassionate lens, how we can assist them, those who are struggling with same sex attraction or gender dysphoria, and why it's a real issue. And again, I tell you all, I make it clear, do not be condescending towards anybody. You never know, Allah might make that person better than you. We honestly believe this, right? We have a duty to be like the prophets. The prophets were the most gentle and the most kind and the most compassionate and sincere people and well meaning people to others. But there were limits, and justice needs to be preserved. So we create that balance, right? And the future of our society is unhealthy right now unless we address this in a wise and effective way. And the future of humanity, if humanity cannot last this way, it cannot. Just do the numbers, do the math. It doesn't make any sense. So I hope it's been made a little bit clearer to you all in terms of, is Islam homophobic? And the answer is no. We're not phobic towards anybody. Yes, we believe that there's morality and there's immorality. There's ethical behaviors, there's unethical behaviors, there's healthy lifestyle, there's unhealthy lifestyle. We sincerely despise this behavior. And those who promote it, they're not on our good side. But when we push back against them, it's not because of their identity or how they choose to live their lifestyle, not from a theological lens, nor from even a political and civil rights lens. But we are pushing back against the aggression, and they have transgressed all boundaries. It's, to put it lightly, it's disgusting. Right? It's absolutely disgusting. So uh, I hope that's been beneficial and informative to you. Sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Ibrahim, if you can stop the stream, please. So for the